Welcome. I know you didn't end up here by chance. Maybe sleep just wouldn't come, or maybe you're looking for a voice to keep you company. That's okay. You're in the right place. Let the sound of rain calm your breath. Breathe slowly and give your mind a chance to drift away from everything for a bit, to dive deeper into the experience. Put on your headphones and turn off the lights. The story is about to begin. Today's tale is about a group of friends who decided to travel to an abandoned town said to be haunted high up in the mountains of Spain. When they got there, it turned out the scary rumors weren't just stories. Art. On the evening of October 16, 1991, Enrique Martinez, a 36-year-old man, he was bent over, carefully using a small knife to cut a mushroom growing next to a moss-covered tree trunk. After picking the mushroom, he gently placed it in his bamboo basket alongside the other mushrooms he had gathered from the area. Then he stood up straight and took a moment to admire the magical view of a dense green valley stretching out before him. Enrique was on a mushroom hunting trip with his wife Ana and their friends Jorge and Sofia. The mushroom picking spot was near an old abandoned village called La Mosara, located in the mountains of northeastern Spain. The idea to visit and explore this area came from Jorge, who had heard about it. There are a lot of strange stories about La Mosara being haunted and the creepy folklore around it. But Enrique didn't pay much attention to those tales and legends. To him, the town itself wasn't all that interesting. What really caught his interest was the chance to get out into nature and collect mushrooms. Enrique loved mushroom picking. He lived with his wife Ana in a busy coastal city in Spain called Tarragona, and their daily life was full of stress and hustle. Enrique worked as a waiter in a bar, so every night he was surrounded by hundreds of people. They kept coming and going from the place, so the chance to get out into nature and escape the noise to gather mushrooms in the calm was really tempting and couldn't be missed. While Enrique was admiring the valley stretched out before him, he looked away from it and turned to continue checking the mountain slope, searching for a specific type of mushroom known to grow in that area. This mushroom was perfect for grilling and was said to add a wonderful flavor when eaten with meat. Enrique had planned this trip from the start to collect these mushrooms so he could later come back and make a delicious meal for his wife and friends. The group slowly climbed the mountain until they finally reached the top. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the abandoned town of La Mosara. La Mosara was a town over 900 years old, but today it's nothing more than a collection of crumbling ruins, some dating back to prehistoric times. Even at its peak, La Mosara was never a big town. It never had more than 300 residents. The last of its inhabitants left about 40 years ago, turning it into a ghost town. The group headed toward one of the abandoned buildings on the edge of La Mosara. The building was in terrible shape, basically just a crumbling foundation with 3 walls left and no roof at all. Still, they moved closer. From where they stood, the friends could see the main road stretching right through the heart of La Mosara. Most of the road was just dirt, running straight ahead, lined by the ruins of old buildings. Only some foundations and crumbling walls were left. About 200 feet from where they stood, the town center came into view, marked by a large church with a tall tower. This part of the route really stood out because, unlike the other buildings that had fallen apart around it, the church was still standing pretty well. Behind the church stretched a cemetery overgrown with wild grass. On the other side of the church, there was a pond covered with plants, and the frogs were croaking loudly, which gave the place a mysterious and eerie vibe. Enrique and his friends stood by that rundown building, staring silently down the path. They already knew this place would be lonely and scary. Lots of people said the town was haunted, and that was one of the main reasons Jorge wanted to come here. But now, after seeing it with their own eyes, the fear factor was way bigger than they expected. The place really was creepy, and to make things worse, as they looked down the main road, fog started rolling in. The town was slowly getting covered bit by bit. Jorge had told his friends earlier, when he was looking up info about the place, that fog is one of its standout features, and that at night, it gets completely swallowed up in thick white fog. But what surprised everyone was that it was midday, and yet the fog was creeping in and spreading over the streets. Finally, Jorge broke the silence and said, "I want to show you something." Then he grabbed his girlfriend Sophie's hand and started running lightly down the main road toward the church. Enrique and I followed them from behind. After they'd gone just 10 or 20 feet, Enrique turned back to look at the spot where they'd been standing just moments before. He noticed it was no longer visible because of the fog. At that moment, Sophie stopped by the side of the road, staring at a strange rectangular rock about 2 feet tall that stuck out of the ground in an unusual way. When Enrique and I caught up with Jorge and Sophie, Jorge placed his hand on top of that odd rock, a look of satisfaction and pride spreading across his face. Then he told his friends, "This strange rock you see here is said to hold dark powers." In reality, that rock was one of the oldest landmarks in all of La Mosara. In the past, armies used to pass through La Mosara, and it's believed the place got its name from this rock. The name La Mosara means a place to pass through or a crossing path. When those armies passed through the town on their way down to the valley, they would always stop at that rock because they believed it had magical powers that could help them win future battles. Even though those armies have long been just history, the rock is still there, and people still believe it holds magical powers. Some even claim that dark forces live inside the rock and that touching it is dangerous. In fact, some say if you touch it, you might. You're pulled into a balanced world full of terrifying demonic creatures. While Jorge was telling his friends the story about the history of this rock and the warnings tied to it, he kept his hand on top of it like he was daring all the warnings. When he finished his story, he looked at the others and smiled, saying, "Come on, someone try touching it." Sophie, Jorge's friend, immediately refused, saying, "No way, I'm not going to anger the evil spirits for you guys." "But I'm Enrique's wife," she said. "You know what? I'll touch it." Jorge smiled and pulled his hand off the rock as I stepped forward steadily, took a deep breath, then reached out and placed my hand on the rock. And for a moment, I was frozen. Everyone was holding their breath, like something was about to burst out of the rock and grab Anna, pulling her inside, but nothing happened. After about a minute, Anna pulled her hand away and everyone burst out laughing. The tension just vanished suddenly. But a few moments later, while Enrique was laughing with the others, he suddenly noticed something strange. The frogs in the pond near the church started making really loud, unnatural noises. It was like touching the rock had amped up the frogs croaking to the max. Enrique turned his whole body around and stared down the road, trying to see through the thick fog toward that pond by the caddy. He could make it out and was trying to figure out if there was something obvious explaining the weird behavior of the frogs. As he focused on the pond, which, like we said, was barely visible, he noticed the church right behind it, though it was partly covered by thick fog. Suddenly, the fog parted for a moment, revealing a window of this abandoned church. In that window, there was a black shape, a dark shadow, just standing still, staring straight at Enrique and his friend. Enrique saw that thing standing there, then just a moment later, it disappeared. The fog rolled back in, covering the window completely, and it was gone. Enrique was able to see everything. He stood there in stunned silence, not sure if what he had seen was real or just a trick of his imagination. But before he could even think it over or try to make sense of it, he heard someone call his name. He snapped out of it suddenly and turned toward the group. It was Ana who had called him, jokingly saying, "Come on, Enrique, the diamond in the rough." Enrique quickly looked at the faces of Ana, Sofia, and Jorge and saw that they were all laughing and smiling, sharing a light, playful moment. Clearly, none of them had seen the dark figure he'd spotted in the church window. Enrique paused for a moment, lost in thought. He looked at his friends' faces, then glanced again toward the church and that window, but the thick fog had rolled back in, hiding everything. Inside, he told himself, no way. I really saw something dark moving inside the church. He must have been imagining it. Enrique turned back to his friends, who clearly weren't going to leave him alone until he touched the rock. So he said, "All right," stepped forward and touched it. The moment his hand met the rock, it felt like everything around him changed. The air got colder, but the rock itself started warming up slowly. And right then, with Enrique's hand still on the rock, it began. Strange thoughts crossed his mind like poetry, as if he could stay like that for hours, just touching the rock. He even started thinking, oh my God, this feeling is amazing. I could stay here forever, just keeping my hand on it. But deep down, a sudden clear and sharp thought popped up. Move away. Move your hand away from the rock right now. And sure enough, Enrique quickly pulled his hand back. The moment he did, all those strange sensations vanished. The air felt normal again, and he didn't feel the urge to touch the rock anymore. He stood there, confused, wondering what had just happened. Meanwhile, Ana, his wife, was standing next to Jorge, both smiling and waiting for him to tell them what it felt like to touch it. But behind them stood Sofia, Jorge's friend, with a serious look on her face. She was the only one who hadn't touched the rock and looked really uneasy about what was happening. She spoke firmly. Guys, let's step away from this rock. I don't want us to keep provoking these evil spirits. Come on, let's go. Jorge wrapped his arm around Sofia and teased. Calm down a bit. Then he added, all right, let's keep exploring. Took her hand and started walking toward the church along the main road. Right behind them, Enrique's wife was running lightly, almost like an excited kid about what they were doing. Enrique, meanwhile, stayed behind. He stood still for an extra moment, even though he tried to convince himself that what he saw through the church window wasn't real. He couldn't shake the strange feeling that washed over him when he touched the rock. There was something off about that rock. In fact, there was something off about the whole village, now completely covered in fog. Everything was wrapped in this thick white mist, like they were cut off from the outside world. At that moment, Enrique just wanted to leave the trail. He didn't want to stay there another minute. The place gave him a weird, unsettling feeling. He was deep down scared and uneasy, but he didn't want to seem like the kind of guy who ruins everyone else's fun. So, he sighed, turned around, and started walking behind his friends and wife along the main road. After a short walk, the fog cleared up a bit, and he caught sight of the pond full of noisy frogs. He also saw the church and that window where he'd once spotted that dark figure, but now it was empty, which gave him a bit of relief. He felt better when he noticed his friends didn't stop at the church or try to go inside. Instead, they kept walking past it toward the cemetery. Enrique definitely didn't want to get near the church, let alone go inside. He tried to convince himself that the figure he saw in the window wasn't real, but deep down, a part of him was still scared of it and wanted to stay far away. But after passing by the pond and walking around the church on his way to the cemetery, he suddenly stopped, turned back, and faced the window where he'd seen that dark shape. It was like a reflex. He looked directly at the window, but it was empty. Nothing was there. Still, he felt something pulling him toward it, pushing him to get closer. Without saying a word to his friends, who didn't even notice because they were busy wandering around, he moved closer. Enrique started getting closer and closer to the window. He stopped right in front of it, staring inside the church. Everything inside was destroyed, but Enrique could still make out the old wooden pews on the floor and the spot where the priest used to give his sermons. While standing there, staring inside, he kept inching closer until his face was just a few inches from the window opening. At that moment, he felt a strong urge to back away, to run off, but he couldn't. Something invisible was pulling him hard inside. And as this was happening, he began to. The frogs' croaking got louder and louder, until Enrique felt like he was completely surrounded by their sounds, as if they were swallowing him up, taking over all his senses. Meanwhile, in the cemetery behind the church, Ana, Jorge, Sofia, and I were wandering among the graves, laughing and reading the inscriptions on the old tombstones. Suddenly, Ana looked up and noticed Enrique wasn't with them. She said something and walked toward the cemetery gate. Looking along the side of the church, she saw Enrique standing, leaning against the wall near a window, staring intently inside. She called out to him several times in a loud voice, but he didn't hear her and didn't turn around. It was like he was completely powerless, totally fixated on whatever was inside the church. She got closer until she was right beside him. He nudged him hard on the shoulder, and it was like he woke up from a dream. He turned to her with vacant eyes, his face full of confusion, but he didn't say a word. She smiled and said, "Come on, let's go to the cemetery. Everyone's there." Then she turned and ran toward the cemetery, before going back to continue her walk among the graves, as if nothing had happened. While she was looking at a particular tombstone, she took a step back to get a better view, but bumped into another tombstone shaped like a big cross with a thick line carved on it. The cross fell to the ground and shattered. Jorge and Sofia heard the stone break in two, turned around and looked at me. And then Jorge quickly realized what had happened. He laughed and said sarcastically, "Oh, now you've pissed off the evil spirits in this town. You better put the stone back where it belongs, right away." She tried to handle the situation with some humor, but honestly, she was freaking out. She really didn't like that she had desecrated a grave in a town rumored to be haunted. She started picking up the broken pieces of the tombstone, trying to put them back, but it was no use. It was completely shattered. While she kept fumbling with the stone, Jorge was still laughing and teasing her about the evil spirits coming to get her for what she did. That's when Sofia started feeling genuinely worried and said nervously, Jorge, so is this place really haunted? I mean, is this town actually haunted? What's the exact story?" At that moment, Jorge stopped laughing and looked at Sofia. "Jorge, yeah, I really think this place is haunted." Then he started telling them the story that made the town of La Mosara known as a haunted place. Back in October 1873, there was a civil war going on in this part of Spain. One of the armies used the caves on the side of the mountain near La Mosara as temporary field hospitals for their wounded. One night, a famous general named Saros got injured during a battle and was taken to one of those caves. When Saros was killed, he was a very beloved leader. So, the 6 people who were in the cave wanted to give him a proper burial. But they knew they had to keep his death completely secret, because if the other soldiers found out, it would crush their morale and give the enemy a huge victory without a fight. So, these 6 built a coffin, placed Saros's body inside, and early the next morning, while it was still dark, they quietly carried the coffin with Saros's body back to his hometown, La Mosara, where they buried him. The tomb was behind the church, hidden so no one could see. After a few weeks, 5 armed enemy soldiers climbed to the top of the mountain toward La Mosara, looking for General Saros. They didn't know he had died in that battle. In fact, only the 6 people who witnessed his death and secretly buried him knew the truth. So, these soldiers thought Saros was hiding in La Mosara. They started breaking into civilians' homes there, searching violently for the general. They dragged people out into the streets, threatening to kill them if they didn't give up any info on where he was. After about an hour of this chaos, a man stood up. An old man from the town, completely desperate, told the enemy soldiers that General Saros had died and was buried in the cemetery behind the church. But the soldiers didn't believe him and asked for proof. The old man said he wasn't exactly sure where in the cemetery he was buried. All he'd heard was that he was there. So the soldiers ordered everyone in the town to head straight to the cemetery. The whole town marched there, guarded by the soldiers, and when they got there, the soldiers told the people to start digging up graves one by one to find Saros's body. As the people dug, reluctantly, the croaking of frogs in the nearby pond gradually grew louder and louder until it filled the air. The annoying noise was unbearable. The soldier leader couldn't stand it anymore, so he moved away from the cemetery and headed to the pond. He started shooting at the water, trying to silence the frogs, but their croaking didn't quiet down. In fact, it got louder and louder. Eventually, the soldier leader gave up on his failed attempt to hush the frogs. He turned back and returned to the cemetery. When he got there, he saw that the townspeople had stopped digging. They had almost dug up every grave, but still hadn't found Saros's body. Now, they were just waiting to see what would happen next. But the leader, staring at the cemetery, noticed something strange. There was only one grave left untouched. Every other one around it had been dug up, except that one. No one dared go near the grave, but the leader pointed at it and said, "Dig up this grave." Immediately, the villagers stepped back like they were saying, "No way, we're not touching that." Then one of them stepped forward and told the leader, "That grave belongs to an old woman who died recently. Everyone thinks she was a witch, and it's dangerous to disturb her grave." But the enemy soldiers didn't care at all. They raised their rifles and shouted at the people, ordering them to dig up the grave right away. Some villagers reluctantly started digging and eventually pulled the coffin out of the ground. The enemy soldiers then opened the coffin lid, and the moment they did, complete silence fell over the place. The woman, who had died weeks ago, looked like she was still alive. Her body was perfectly preserved, with no signs of decay. She was lying on her back, her skin extremely pale, but she hadn't started to decompose yet. Even her cheeks still had a faint pink tint, and her lips were slightly parted. But what shocked everyone into silence wasn't just her condition, it was her eyes. They were wide open, staring straight ahead. When they opened the coffin, it seemed like she was looking right at them. After a moment of stunned silence, the townspeople started screaming, crying, and backing away from the coffin, while the soldiers, the enemies, were stunned by the sight of this woman. But they felt more anger than fear because they realized it meant they hadn't found the general. Frustrated, the soldiers grabbed the old woman's body, whom they thought was a witch, dragged her out of her grave, and hung her from a tree. Then they started shooting at her wildly and non-stop until her body was completely torn apart by the hail of bullets. But as soon as the soldiers stopped firing, they noticed everything suddenly went completely silent. Just moments ago, the croaking frogs in the nearby pond had been deafening, but now all sound had vanished. The whole town was engulfed in this strange quiet. The surprise was so shocking that the soldiers didn't say a word. They just turned around and ran away from the place, fleeing without a single word. After the soldiers left, the villagers started respectfully reburying their dead. Suddenly, one of the villagers jumped into the old witch's grave, and as soon as he landed, his foot suddenly sank deeper into the ground than usual. He had hit something hollow beneath the surface, and the earth gave way beneath him easily. It turned out that what he had fallen onto was another coffin, a secret coffin buried beneath the witch's tomb. The soldiers hadn't seen it. This coffin belonged to General Saros, who had secretly buried those 6 men. General Saros had secretly placed his own coffin inside it. There was an open grave that had been prepared for someone else. They covered the coffin with a layer of dirt so it wouldn't be visible. The next day, the villagers came and buried the witch's coffin in the same grave, not realizing that the general's coffin was already buried underneath. Then they filled the grave with dirt and put a headstone on it. But because they believed she was a witch, they didn't write her name on the stone. They just carved a horizontal line on the grave marker. Since that incident, when the woman's grave was desecrated by the soldiers, the village never returned to normal. People in the village started dying one after another, and the land became useless for farming. They couldn't plant anything anymore. Then bugs swarmed the village, followed by waves of diseases and plagues. It didn't take long before Lamosara became known as a cursed village. By the 1950s, this curse seemed to have driven out the last of the residents, officially turning it into a ghost town. Music. After Jorge finished telling the story, Ana felt terrified and stared straight at the ground. She realized that the gravestone she had accidentally dropped and broken had a horizontal line carved across the middle. It was the witch's gravestone, the very one she had broken. Suddenly, a terrifying feeling washed over her, and she was about to scream at Jorge. Sofia said she wanted to leave right away, but before she did, she noticed something at the base of one of the tomb walls, a mushroom of the same kind she knew her husband Enrique was looking for. So, I went over, picked the mushroom, then turned around to see Enrique, but he wasn't anywhere in the tomb. Suddenly, a terrifying thought hit her. Had Enrique actually followed her to the tomb after she saw him near the church? She wasn't sure. She thought he was following her, but now she wasn't so certain. She called out loudly for Enrique, but he didn't answer. Then she turned and looked towards Sofia and Kai, who she could barely see through the fog, and asked them, "Have you seen my husband? Is he here? Do you know where he went?" They both answered together, "No, we have no idea." At that moment, I started to feel really scared because the situation at the cemetery was getting super creepy for me. That's why I dropped the mushroom from my hand and ran out of the cemetery quickly. Sofia and Jorge didn't really know what was going on or understand how desperate I was to find Enrique. They saw me rushing off to look for him, but they slowed down and walked behind me calmly. When we got out of the cemetery and started walking alongside the church, the visibility was almost zero because of the thick fog. And as we moved, we still couldn't see anything. From what I could see, it was either Ana or Enrique, but they could hear me calling Enrique repeatedly from a distance. As they moved forward, both Sofia and Jorge started seeing shadows moving inside the fog. Each time, they thought it might be Ana or Enrique, but whenever they got closer to where the shadows were, there was nothing, just thick fog. That's when Sofia began gripping Jorge's arm tighter and tighter. Jorge, who had been joking before about this place being cursed, was now starting to feel a bit scared too. So they decided to pick up their pace and move faster toward the sound of the voice as Sofia and Jorge got closer. More than me, the sound of frogs croaking in that pond grew louder and louder until Corky and Sofia could hear my voice over the noise of the frogs. Then, suddenly, the frogs stopped croaking completely, and all Corky and Sofia could hear was my crying. They couldn't see me because of the fog, but they walked toward my voice. Finally, they found me bent over, my back fully turned to them, right where Enrique had been standing before, staring through the church window. Corky and Sofia came up to me, reached out, and placed their hands on my shoulders. When I turned around, I was holding Enrique's basket, which was filled with all kinds of mushrooms. Tears streaming down her face, she told her two friends that he had disappeared. Jorge, Sofia, and I spent the next hour searching in vain for Enrique Villamos. The fog was so thick that visibility was almost zero, and now darkness was falling, making it really hard to keep looking for someone. After that hour passed, even though they had no clue where Enrique was or what had happened, the friends decided the best, and really the only option, was to leave and notify the authorities. Once they did, a massive search operation was launched all over the area over the next week. But despite that, all that huge effort didn't turn up any trace of Enrique. He completely disappeared, leaving behind only the basket of straw that Ana had found. After a week of searching, the authorities called off the operation and told Ana that her husband had probably gotten lost and died somewhere. But Ana couldn't accept that conclusion, so she kept going back to La Mosara looking for Enrique. In January 1992, 3 months after Enrique vanished, Ana, Sofia, and Jorge returned to Serra to do another search. While they were out looking, the three friends passed by the church and walked right past the same window that Enrique was standing there, staring inside, and she noticed her basket beside her. As they were passing by, they happened to see Rao inside the church, down on the main floor where the seats and pulpit used to be. There were 6 people wearing dark cloaks standing in a circle. They didn't seem to be doing anything except just standing there. Right away, I felt really uneasy because I thought these must be a group of ghost hunters who came looking for something supernatural. That's because the story of Enrique's disappearance had made the news, especially since he vanished in a town long thought to be haunted. As a result, a lot of people started. People were flocking to the inns looking for ghosts or trying to figure out what happened to Enrique. As for Ana, who was still grieving the loss of her husband, seeing all these people was really painful. She didn't see it as some game or adventure. She was living a harsh reality where her husband had disappeared in that very place. She stepped right up to the window and shouted at the 6 people wearing cloaks, telling them to get out of there immediately and show some respect. But before she could finish yelling, one of the cloaked figures turned and looked straight at Ana, and she instantly took a step back because of him. He definitely wasn't a ghost hunter. He was faceless, just a dark hollow you could stare into. Even though there were no eyes, it felt like this being, this aura, was staring right at her. Before me, Sofia or Jorge could react to what they saw inside the church. Suddenly, they heard this insanely loud noise behind them. It was the croaking of frogs, getting louder and louder, creeping up in a terrifying way until it drowned out everything else. The 3 of them spun around, expecting maybe to see a group of people coming, but all they saw was fog covering the path. When they looked back again, they looked inside the synagogue, but the 6 cloaked figures had completely vanished. Right away, they suspected these mysterious beings had left the synagogue and were probably coming toward them. The three friends didn't wait a second longer. They turned around and ran as fast as they could, fleeing from the Musara. As for Enrique, he was never found. His wife, friends, and the authorities still have no idea what happened to him to this day. There have also been other cases of people disappearing after entering the Musara, and none of them have been found so far. Music. If you like this story, don't forget to support us. Like and share the video with anyone who enjoys this kind of content. And don't forget to subscribe to our variety channel. We always have something worth watching. Hey, music.